This month alone, we've brought in more than 1,500 migrants. That's way more than last month's record high of nearly 1,100. And hey, it's only June 17th. We've got a couple weeks to go. Just to keep this in perspective, we have admitted, everyone, 4,328 Syrian refugees this year. Roughly 3,000 of them have come in the last 6 weeks. Imagine that. Meanwhile, of the 4,328 Syrians now here, 4,289 of them are Muslim. This, despite the chilling warning that we got from the CIA director that ISIS is doing everything it can to fight its fighters here. That means even posing as migrants. Watch.
The group is probably exploring a variety of means for infiltrating operatives into the West, including in refugee flows, smuggling routes, and legitimate methods of travel.
But my next guest says preventing Syrians from coming here is against who we are as Americans. And we need to be welcoming them into our country in greater numbers. Joining me now, national security and foreign analyst Arash Ari Aramesh. Arash, good to see you. We are at war. We're at war with ISIS, and ISIS has promised to seed the refugee population with terrorists. So why are you so convinced that bringing Syrians here is good policy?
Well, you can't have an argument by connecting two premises that are completely irrelevant. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Okay, ISIS is trying to infiltrate the refugee population and do so and try to carry out attacks. That might make sense in Europe. Why? Because most refugees go through land. The refugees that come to the U.S., first of all, there's a waiting period of about 2 years. Secondly, they have to go through a State Department interview, FBI interview, Department of Defense interview, and then a Department of Homeland Security screening. It's not as if they just get on a boat and get off the port of Long Beach.
You know, two issues I take with what you just said. You said, you know, maybe it's a problem in Europe, really not a problem here. We just heard from John Brennan yesterday that, in fact, it is a problem here, that, in fact, they are trying to seed the refugee populations, and that there may be ISIS jihadists already here in this country as we speak. So, number one, that's an issue. Number two, you say, look, they got to go through all this vetting, 2 years of vetting. I mean, Arash, how do you explain how suddenly, just within the last 6 weeks, we've taken 3,000 Syrian refugees when, you know, it had taken months just to get 1,000 in the door? I mean, why have we ramped it up suddenly in the last 6 weeks?
Again, these people have waited for a long time. It's not as if they just got here 6 weeks ago and were admitted right away. And B, I am all for rigorous screening processes. Let's screen them. Let's interview them. Let's run background checks and make sure the bad apples are weeded out. But what John Brennan was referring to is that ISIS will try to utilize every tool possible in their arsenal to carry out attacks. And that is true. But it doesn't mean that we should demonize some women, children, Christians amongst them, Muslims amongst them, seculars amongst them,
you know,
who are destroyed by war from seeking refuge.
You got teenage boys that are fighting for ISIS right now. You have women that are fighting for ISIS right now. We have the San Bernardino terrorist. We have a wife that sat back and watched her husband plan and acquire weapons there in Orlando, Florida, and didn't tell anyone about it. You know this study. I've cited it to you and to our viewers before. A recent poll out of the UK, well vetted, said that 2/3 of Muslims there in the UK would not report information about a terror attack should they have it, should they know anything. And so, Arash, I just question, given the environment we live in now, don't we need to be more careful?
Absolutely, and that's why I urge everyone not to alienate the Muslim population here in the United States.
How are we at risk of alienating them?
Well, by trying to paint all Muslims with the same brush, by trying to categorize and put everybody categorically in the same group.
Don't you think there should be pressure,
as terrorists, as threats?
Pressure on the Muslim population to actually fix themselves from within?
Legitimate law enforcement. You're talking to a Democrat who is very, very strong on national security. I think legitimate law enforcement and intelligence capabilities and capacities have to be enhanced. But by coming out and painting all Muslims with the same brush, we're doing ourselves a big, big damage. And let me tell you something really quickly. Trump keeps talking about stopping immigration from certain troubled parts of the world. Well, let me tell you about a region in Europe called the Balkans. Very troubled, huge Muslim population, went through ethnic ethnic cleansing genocide twice in the 1990s. We had to intervene twice to prevent more genocide in Europe. And guess who is from the Balkans? Trump's wife. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I'm just trying to tell you
I think
this
that's
level
a
of
separate,
bigotry.
different talking.
This level of bigotry.
I think it's not bigotry, Arash. It's saying we need to be careful. Let's use all the common sense and vet the heck out of everyone. And why, Arash, do we need to take 65,000 Syrian refugees here, as Hillary Clinton has insisted we must do? Why do we have to take them here? Why can't they stay in the Middle East? Why can't Saudi Arabia step up and do its part?
So first of all, these 65,000 people are not going to come here next weekend. It's a multi-year, probably a decade-long process. Second, I urge our government to put more pressure on our allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, to take more, to do more, and stop funding spread of hatred around the world in Asia, in the Middle East, and also in North America. Let's put more pressure on our so-called allies. So actually, by the way, do a lot of business with Mr.
Let's put more pressure on our allies, and I'd say more pressure on the Muslim community to start fixing itself. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is a big proponent of this. He's a reformist. He's calling
on that.
On Muslims to reform. So it's got to be a two-pronged effort. Anyway, Arash, always good to see you. Thank you, sir.